Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a detective story that's been hiding in plain sight for 2,000 years. It all revolves around a single mysterious prophecy that didn't just shape a religion, it changed how we read ancient texts forever.
And it all boils down to this question. How did one kind of obscure quote solve a massive identity crisis for the early church? And even more than that, how did it kick off 2 millennia of debate about what prophecy even is?
Okay, let's set the scene. Picture this. It's about 49 AD, we're in Jerusalem, and the brand new Christian movement, it is facing its first huge crisis.
So here's the problem. The movement started out as a totally Jewish thing, right? But now, all of a sudden, you've got waves of non-Jews, they were called Gentiles, who are starting to believe in Jesus. And this created a massive cultural and theological storm.
The leaders were wrestling with some really fundamental questions. I mean, do these Gentiles have to become fully Jewish to be considered Christian? Do they need to be circumcised? Do they have to follow all 613 laws of Moses? This wasn't just a small disagreement, you guys. It was something that could have literally split the whole movement right down the middle.
So all the leaders get together for this massive meeting, what we now call the Jerusalem Council. And after a lot of, passionate debate, the leader of the church in Jerusalem, a guy named James, stands up. The room goes quiet, and he's about to drop what he believes will settle this whole thing once and for all, pulling from the ancient prophets.
He quotes the prophet Amos. And this passage, it seems to settle everything. It talks about rebuilding David's kingdom, and, get this, it specifically mentions all the Gentiles. So, boom, case closed, right? The Gentiles are in, no strings attached.
Well, not so fast. Because here's where our mystery really begins. When you flip back to the original prophecy in the Old Testament book of Amos, the wording is different. And we're not talking about a small change. It's a change that flips the entire meaning on its head.
Okay, look at this. On one side, you have what James said, that the rest of mankind may seek the Lord. That's all about spiritual conversion. But on the other side, the standard version of Amos says, so that they may possess the remnant of Edom. That sounds like a military takeover. So what is going on here? Did James just change the words to win the argument?
So how in the world do we explain this? Well, let's dive into our first major theory. And for centuries, this was pretty much the dominant explanation. It suggests that James knew exactly what he was doing and was giving everyone a key to interpreting prophecy.
This viewpoint is often tied to a framework called amillennialism. Now don't worry about the big word. The core idea is simple. It says that many of those Old Testament prophecies about a future, physical kingdom for Israel, they're not actually literal. They're being fulfilled right now, spiritually, in the church.
So according to this theory, James isn't misquoting. Not at all. He's providing an inspired reinterpretation. He's using his authority as an apostle to reveal that the deeper, truer meaning of possessing Edom was really about the church bringing in or possessing the Gentiles through evangelism.
And you can see how this logic plays out. The fallen tent of David, that's not some future political kingdom. It's the humble family line that Jesus was born into. Possessing Edom, that becomes the conversion of non-Jews. And all those promises about the land and harvests, well, those become beautiful metaphors for spiritual blessings in the church today.
And for a long, long time, this spiritual interpretation was the main explanation. It seemed to solve the puzzle. But then, archaeology unearthed a clue that pointed to a totally radical alternative.
This new evidence raised a really fascinating possibility. What if James wasn't changing the text at all? What if he was actually quoting a more accurate version, one that was older than the standard text we use today?
This is where something called the Septuagint enters the story. It's a Greek translation of the Old Testament made centuries before Jesus was even born. For most early Christians, including James, this was their Bible. And guess what? Its version of Amos 9 matches James's quote almost exactly. It says, "Seek the Lord, not possess Edom." This timeline really puts it all into perspective. You can see that a version of the text with the "Seek the Lord" reading was around long before James in the early church. The standard Hebrew text that we use today, the one that says "possess Edom," wasn't finalized until much, much later.
But the real bombshell, the real game changer, came with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Among these ancient fragments, scholars found a piece of a Hebrew manuscript older than Christianity itself that quoted Amos. And when they looked at the original Hebrew, the difference came down to a single letter. The word it used meant to seek,
not to possess. It turns out James was likely quoting an authentic, ancient Hebrew text all along.
This incredible discovery just blows the case wide open, right? And it gives rise to a completely different theory for what James was really up to at that council.
This second theory says, forget about all that figurative reinterpretation stuff. James was using an accurate text to make a very sharp, very logical point that directly addressed the specific issue they were all arguing about, circumcision.
Okay, follow the logic here, it's pretty clever. First, remember, the debate wasn't if Gentiles could be saved, it was specifically about circumcision. Second, notice another small change James makes. He swaps the vague phrase "in that day" for the very specific "after this I will return." He's pointing to the future second coming. So here's the brilliant conclusion. If the prophecy says that at Christ's future return there will be uncircumcised Gentiles who bear his name, then why on earth would we force them to be circumcised now? It's a slam-dunk argument that completely settled the debate.
So we're left with two compelling solutions to this ancient puzzle, and each one has massive implications for how we understand the relationship between the Old and New Testaments.
So let's just lay it all out. Theory 1 says James gives a figurative reinterpretation, making the prophecy about the church now. And this becomes a model for reading other prophecies figuratively. Theory 2 says James used an accurate quote to make a logical point about a future kingdom, solving the immediate debate without changing the prophecy's ultimate literal meaning.
And look, this isn't just some dusty, ancient history. The conclusion you lean towards directly impacts how you read huge chunks of the Bible. It sets a precedent. Is prophecy mainly about the church now, or is it about a kingdom that's still to come? The answer to that big question starts with how you solve the puzzle of Amos 9.
Which leaves us with the ultimate question, one that goes way beyond this single verse. Is ancient prophecy a fixed blueprint for a literal future, just waiting to be fulfilled exactly as it was written? Or is it more of a living, spiritual truth that unfolds and finds new, deeper meaning through later revelation? That's the question, and it's one that people are still debating to this very day.